Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us from Oxford University. I'm really delighted and particularly grateful to my friend Anu, who has organized this session with the Oxford University students. My name is Elham Fardad. I am the CEO and founder of the charity Migrant Leaders. In terms of my background, I am in my 40s, married with 2 wonderful children, and I've spent a really good career the last 23 years in companies such as GE, News Corp, and Ernst & Young. But life hasn't always been this good. I came to the UK some 30 years ago as a young migrant, and myself and my family experienced some of the typical challenges that migrant families experience in terms of lack of finances, lack of a visa, family breakup, and lots of challenges. But I was lucky enough to have some supporters and mentors who helped me along the way. I'd like to explain that to you because that's really primarily the reason I launched Migrant Leaders 3 years ago, because I realized what was really lacking in my own youth, and I know that young people, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds, have a lot of potential and aspiration, and that as a society we should help them achieve all their aspirations and fulfill their potential. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what is the Migrant Leaders Development Programme by sharing my screen. I am sure that you can now see our quarterly impact report, which you would also find on our website and in all our social media communications every quarter as an update in terms of the progress that we've made within the charity. First of all, I would like to actually talk a little bit about what is the problem that we are trying to solve. We are effectively an ethnicity charity, a youth development charity, and a social mobility charity. When we look at the ethnicity challenge, one of the most pivotal reports in the UK was the Parker Review, which was published in 2017. This report showed that when you look at the FTSE 100 boardrooms in the UK, even when you include non-executive directors, only 2% of FTSE 100 boardrooms are citizens of colour. If you exclude the non-exec directors, that number would be even lower. So clearly, representation at senior levels in FTSE 100 companies is not great. I did further research and analysis on the data back in 2017 when the Parker Review was published, and I could see that doing the analysis, only 1.3% of those FTSE 100 boardrooms were migrants. And looking at every single one of those people, almost all of them were privately educated. That told me something about the chances for a typical young migrant to succeed. So I realized that the first place I'd like to focus in launching a charitable foundation would be on first and second generation young migrants, so that we can help them fulfill their potential. If you look at the 2020 position, actually, the numbers show that things have not improved very much. And it's rather unsurprising because the root causes of lack of ethnic diversity in UK boardrooms are complex. But that's not a message of negativity. That is a message of hope, a message that says we must all collaborate together across the education sector, corporates, government, public, private sector. We should really collaborate together to address all the root causes of lack of ethnic diversity in UK boardrooms. And that's what I really set out to do and to achieve. So the program is quite comprehensive, but simple. It's basically made up of 3 elements. When a young person, first or second generation migrant, between the age of 16 and 25, applies to our program on our website, and they get shortlisted for interview. They go through their interview so that we get to know them better and understand their aspirations, strengths, development needs, and requirements. And we then carefully pair them up with a senior mentor. We currently have 510 senior mentors from 95 FTSE 100 and leading firms. So each of these mentors come from different technical backgrounds, they come from different companies and sectors, and we match them very carefully to the aspirations, strengths, and needs of each of the mentees. In addition to the mentoring element, we provide really high quality work experiences and conferences and workshops to the mentees. This is mainly by us co-developing our work experiences, such as our the virtual internship that we did in the summer with Kantar. We have done a number of conferences and workshops also with our corporate partners, Anglo American, Smith & Nephew, and Kantar, and we continue to expand our corporate partnerships with top firms in different sectors. The third element of our development program is the digital program, which gives you further training and support and conferences and workshops. We have an annual education conference, which Anu was part of the first one actually 3 years ago, whereby we help and train the young people in applying for top universities. And we have lately partnered with Varsity Scholars and a member of our advisory board, Kate Kettle, who then works with us to help the students write up their personal statements and university applications, so that we have students really doing themselves justice in getting into the universities of their choice. If you look at the impact, some of the impact of our mentees, there are so many stories I could share with you. In our impact report, we've only got a handful of these mentee case studies purely because of the space, but we currently have 410 young mentees part of our program. So there are many, many success stories that we could share with you. One of these mentees is one of my direct mentees, actually, Luke, who Anu might remember from 3 years ago. Luke is a really talented young man from a migrant family. He always wanted to do accounting and finance, went on to Leeds University to do a degree, and through his talent and hard work and a bit of coaching from me, managed to get a summer internship at EY. And I knew that at EY, pretty much 80% of the summer interns, if they do well, end up getting a graduate job offer. And Luke, being brilliant as he is, he got the graduate job offer and he just started September 2020 at EY. And I know that Luke will not only succeed for himself, but he will bring a lot of diversity and differences to celebrate for EY. He will really be a success story for himself, for EY, and the next generation who will see him as a role model in a Big Four firm of accountants. So Luke is an example. There were many, many other stories to share with yourselves, but I would encourage all the students to go into our website, www.migrantleaders.org.uk, and explore and read our impact report, read about our program, look at our knowledge and experience that we've shared in our documents and training materials. And if you feel that you'd like to do more with the charity, feel free to apply as a candidate on our website. In terms of eligibility for applications, you need to be between 16 and 25 years old. You can be a first or second generation migrant, but actually lately we opened up the program to all disadvantaged backgrounds, even if they are not first or second generation migrants, because we realized that our program is really, really good for social mobility in Britain, and it felt right to be more inclusive and accept and invite applicants from all disadvantaged youths in Britain. And that has worked out very, very well for us. In fact, one of my own mentees, Brian, is one such example who's at King's College and will be a future leader. So I'm not going to talk more about the program because I would like to allow more time for questions and answers, and I shall stop sharing the documents so that we can have a conversation. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Elham, for sharing the Migrant Leaders Programme with us. Again, as Elham has said, if you want any more information, please feel free to go to migrantleaders.org.uk. Now we're going to shift to the second part of today's session, which is really an opportunity to ask Elham questions. For those that joined after we started, Elham introduced herself and spoke of the fact that she has a professional career spanning about 25 years in leadership positions across several blue chip multinational corporations, including GE, News Corp, and EY. And so for those of you that have taken the time to attend this evening, this is an opportunity to, in a way, pick Elham's fantastic brain and to ask questions and to get a form of coaching. So I'm going to ask at this moment if anyone has any questions. If not, I could start us off with a few. But again, this really is an opportunity to in a way, get a form of career coaching. So I would ask away if I had any questions. So do we have any questions at this stage? No? Okay. So Elham, I'm going to begin by asking, for a young person, whether they're doing their undergraduate, doing their master's, or even doing their PhD, how can they define and know for themselves what types of companies, industries, or roles are best suited for their interests, their personalities, their temperaments? How would you suggest they go about doing that?
This is really tough. I remember when I was younger, I was quite fearful of that decision because I knew that you could go off at a tangent and waste a lot of years if you make the wrong decision. But don't let analysis paralyze you. You know what they call paralysis by analysis. You know, most good decisions are based on a few important data points and then making the decision and acting on it. Because even if you were to choose the wrong place and get a couple of work experiences, at least you find out what doesn't suit you. Having said that, in analyzing the decision, I would encourage everyone, particularly young people, to think about where they come from. Who were they when they were 10, 12, 13 years old? Because your values and your aspirations generally don't change very much. And then do lots of research, not just on what the company says they are, but also ask a few contacts, a few mentors, a few supporters who have experienced working in that company, who have experienced being a customer or vendor for that company, and ask them, how do they do business? Anything you can do to find out what their values are, what their objectives are, where the company is heading strategically, and whether you can see yourself adding value to the objectives of that company. Because if you share values with them and you like the way they do business and you find that they have integrity like you do, and you can see yourself bringing commercial value to the company's future based on their strategy and direction, then you can't go far wrong.
Brilliant, thank you. So we have a question in the chat from Sheila. It says, what is your view on brain drain? How do we balance the desire to develop our mother countries while trying to excel in more developed jurisdictions? It's a brilliant question.
What a fabulous question, because I myself have often dwelled on this. Coming from Iran some 30 years ago, Iran went through a fantastic period of growth for sort of 40, 50 years, and then the revolution happened towards the end of the 70s. I won't comment on where I stand on the revolution, but the absolute impact has been isolation from the West, isolation from other countries. Those who could afford it or could escape left and never went back. And the brain drain has happened in a very extreme form. The result, as we all know, is further isolation and economic downturn for those who stay, and is a negative thing. So the question, I guess, is, does one, as a foreign national, as a migrant, go back after being educated in the US or the UK? Do they go back to their country of origin so that the brain drain is limited? I think you can only help others if you first succeed in your career yourself. The sky is the limit. You know, in the world today, you could be educated in the UK, work for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years in corporates or elsewhere in the West, and then use that knowledge to launch international businesses, international charities, go back to help your country of origin or the region, as well as help Britain and give back to Britain for welcoming you and educating you and training you. So these are no longer mutually exclusive questions. I think the sky is the limit in terms of what we can do.
Okay, Sheila, I hope that answers your question. To everyone else, either Joe or Timothy, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat as well. So my next question is, how do, as young people, young ambitious people, how do we reconcile the lack of ethnic minority leaders at the top of corporates and still maintain our aspirations? How do we not allow that to deter or discourage us?
It's a hard one. For the first 20 years of my career, I thought I was very inspired and supported and sponsored by white middle-aged men who were the leaders of the corporations that I worked in. And I thought, that's all right, and I'm okay with that. And then I realized the difference when I came across a couple of female leaders. And I realized, wow, that ignited me. You know, that really made me feel inspired by them. It gave me a fresh sense of purpose and inspiration and energy. And one such female is Yvonne Thompson, who I met sort of 3 years ago. And I realized what was missing when I met Yvonne. I realized the power of a role model that I can really relate to. So I recognize that having role models that we can relate to is very powerful. But in the meantime, the lack of ethnic diversity in leadership roles in corporates, we will work on moving that forward as fast as we can. But for a while, we're going to have to tolerate that so that we don't wait around for relatable role models to motivate us. You've got to find the motivation buttons on yourself, whether it is an inspirational role model, whether it is targets at work, whether it is doing it for your family, whether it is your sense of purpose and shared values with colleagues who may not be like you, because let's celebrate differences as well. You've got to find how to press your motivational buttons. And I often recommend things that you might not expect. For example, an example of someone who really knew how to press his own motivation buttons is Michael Jordan, the basketball player. If you watch interviews and his life story and the way he knew how to bring it on, that you can apply those techniques to everyday life and even a corporate career. Look at sports people, look at leaders, look at people who resemble you or who don't resemble you, and use snippets of their techniques to motivate you every day. And on different days, different things work. Sometimes I find myself looking back at the mentee stories that I've written up for the impact report. To me, that's one of my buttons. When I reread the mentee stories and the impact the charity is having, that never fails to motivate me. So find your own buttons and have a toolbox of motivation that you can use every day.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. And in your answer, you touched on inspiration, you touched on role models, you touched on the importance of mentors and sponsors. And a huge part of the Migrant Leader Development Programme is the provision of a senior mentor. And I guess in your view, why would you say that mentorship matters for professional success, for progression, and how has mentorship aided your achievements thus far?
Mentorship is really important. And if you look at many corporates, they always like to put definitions in boxes. They talk about the difference between mentorship and a sponsorship, the difference between mentorship and coaching. They define these roles very carefully. But our experience at Migrant Leaders has showed us that whilst we are providing, as part of the development program, mentorship, actually, every mentoring relationship is a slightly different. We train the mentors and mentees in terms of how to become a mentor, how to succeed as a mentee. We've got pre-mentoring programs, we've got a mentor's guide, mentees guides, training sessions, to really for them to get the best out of their mentoring relationship. But at the end, we find that in practice, each mentee has got different things from their mentor. Some of them have got coaching because they needed to build their confidence and towards specific milestones such as job interviews or university interviews. Others needed connections, contacts. We've got an example of a law student who was given a law mentor who is now connecting the mentee with the head of legal at his firm for further mentoring and guidance. Some of them have done what our networking guide and training has told them to do and gone and got themselves work experiences at their mentor's workplace. There are all sorts of benefits that mentoring gives. But at the kind of early stages, one of the key things that mentoring achieves is help give a vision and a roadmap for one's career, because that is often missing in young people who might not have the kind of professionals in their network of friends and family who they could use as examples of career strategy that they might find inspirational.
Yeah. And so how has having a mentor sort of helped you achieve all the different things that you've been able to achieve?
For me, I think when I was young, I was such a keen reader. I used to go to the receptions of recruitment consultancy offices in the best clothes that I could possibly have and afford. I used to pretend that I have an appointment just to go and take their leaflets about careers that I can then take home and read. So I read a lot and devised a strategy and roadmap for the career I thought I want. But what I was lacking was contacts and insights. I didn't really have a clue what working as a finance person will feel like in a real big company and in different sectors. So it that was lacking, and unfortunately, at that early stage in my career, I didn't have mentors or connections. So I had to do a lot of zigzagging between two or three companies until I found the right place and gathered momentum. I was lucky enough that I could do that by the time I was 25 and landed my first financial controller job at that point in GE, and the rest was history. If I had mentors, I could have done that faster and with less worry.
Right. So this idea of direction and strategy and speed in some instances, which
Yeah.
is amazing. So we have another question in the chat from Joe. It says, what are some of the challenges you have personally faced in your journey so far as a first/second generation professional in FTSE 100 companies here in the UK? And how have you overcome these?
Really good question. Luckily, I actually quite liked being different. At a school, at university, in these FTSE 100 big multinationals, I was always different in all sorts of ways. The way that diversity that I brought, different set of experiences, meant that I saw problems differently, therefore came up with alternative solutions that someone else might not think about. And that's exactly what diversity is good for when it comes to companies and problem solving. The more different our experiences as a team, the better we can solve problems together. So I wasn't afraid of celebrating my difference. But I found that sometimes some other people found that difficult. For example, as a migrant, you might express things differently. In your culture, as a female, you might have been encouraged to talk differently. You may, for example, being from an Asian culture, I was always brought up to be absolutely respectful of authority and hierarchy. And sometimes that has hindered me, because in a meeting with a senior executive, board member, I had something really useful to say, backed up by evidence and a solution, and I sometimes refrained from saying something because the guy might have been several grades above me. That was actually at the end detrimental to my career and detrimental to the company. I should have shared those opinions rather than worry about what that figure of authority will think of me. The first step is awareness. If you're aware whether your difference is to be celebrated or whether some of your differences are hindering you and others. If you see that some of your differences are hindering you and others, then we need to become self-aware and work on improving those.
Brilliant. That's powerful. And I think the first thing you mentioned as well, stands out to me particularly, this idea of, being aware of difference and celebrating it actually and owning it, and not wanting to blend in so much, but then also being self-aware enough to know that there are, potential things in upbringing or the way that we think that can potentially hold us back. And so knowing when to be introspective and challenge that, I think that's powerful. Thank you for sharing. So the next question that I have is, what top 3 pieces of advice have you ever received with regards to your career, and how have they helped you sort of move along and attain success?
So it would be nice to tell you guys what the top pieces of career advice have been and how that has contributed to my success, because I took those pieces of advice. I have plenty of stories like that to tell. But why don't I think about really good pieces of advice which, with hindsight, I should have taken, didn't take, and paid a price for it? Wouldn't that be more interesting? So one that comes to mind is patience. People still tell me, be patient, don't try and achieve X, Y, and Z so fast, take your time. I still haven't managed that. And I think I think that means that it drives me to work really hard towards the purpose that I care about, such as Migrant Leaders Charity, and that's an advantage. But I think sometimes it would be better to sometimes be a little bit more patient and pace ourselves a little bit. And my colleagues know that with that in mind, this Christmas was actually the first time in 3 years that during a holiday I did not work at all for a few days. So I too struggle with taking advice and kind of like self-awareness with advice. It's good to acknowledge first whether you agree with a piece of advice. And once on a logical level you agree, then you've got to train yourself to take that advice. So I think on balance, career advice that says, be patient, work at pace, but not with haste, would be good advice. And I wished I had taken that advice more. Mm-hmm. The other piece of advice that I didn't take enough, perhaps, is don't worry. Don't worry. I think I worried too much. And again, being self-aware, people who come from migrant, disadvantaged background and have gone through tough times, like I have as such an example, sometimes we worry too much. And I wished I had taken that advice earlier on in my career and recognized that sometimes our worries, anxieties, lack of self-confidence are a reflection of the environment we came from and the hardship we came from, not necessarily not necessarily the position we are in today. So I wished I had listened to that advice earlier. And I remember an EY partner once, he told me with that in mind, that always think from a position of a strength, not from a position of a strength, not from a position of weakness. So always psych yourself up and remind yourself that you are now in a position of a strength. You're not in a position of weakness, lacking resources and connections like how things were 20, 30 years ago. So always think from a position of a strength. And I am still trying to think that way and kind of move beyond the hardships that I went through when I was younger.
Amazing, thank you. And the last question that I have here is, can you share some books, resources, podcasts, things that you maybe listened to while you were earlier on in your career, or things that you listen to now that help you stay motivated, that inspire that growth mindset within you, just things that contribute to your growth. So whether they're past or present, books, podcasts, yeah, what you consume that keeps you going.
Absolutely. I think the first thing to say is that there are many inspirational speakers, knowledgeable people who are very valuable, but different podcasts, books, and tools are suitable at different stages in one's career. It depends on where you are in your career, but broadly speaking, the first part of anyone's career is about devising a strategy and gathering momentum. And to that extent, there are plenty of books on time management, productivity, choosing the right path. And I will share those in the chat later. I've developed some diversity accelerators that I can share in the chat later that helps as a module, helps young people decide which career path they should take. Particularly on making choices that suit your values, I would recommend podcasts by Rene Carayol. Rene wrote a book called Spike. Rene Carayol is one of the patrons of our charity, of our Migrant Leaders charity. And his book, Spike, is all about that. Is about, rather than focusing on addressing your so-called development needs, find what you're gifted at and perfect your gifts, and then choose teams, environments, and organizations which really need and value your gifts. And that book is called The Spike. I couldn't recommend it enough. And all podcasts by Rene Carayol, as well as many other recommendations I can give you, I would recommend.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. The other question that I have, actually, I thought that was the last one, but what tips would you give to anyone listening that actually wants to apply, but maybe feel like the development program might be too competitive, or not really knowing how best to put themselves forward on paper? Or are there any tips you can give on how they can best impress at the interview as well?
Thank you. I think the first thing to say is that the purpose of our recruitment process is to gauge potential and motivation. It's not necessarily to cherry pick the most high achieving students who are already there. There are plenty of very high achieving students who are already there, and we just take them further. But whatever stage you're at, we will take you and get you to where you want to be. So ironically, it would be, don't worry and fill in the application from a position of a strength. Exactly the advice that I was always given. And also the interview within our application process isn't so much designed to trip you up. By the time you get to interview, we're all as a team, myself, Fawzia, Catherine, and all of us are cheering for you to get through. The interview is really about us getting to know you as a candidate so that we understand later on, if you get into the program, how can we give you and match the best mentor for you actually? And to also make sure that we give you the right advice, because we really recognize what a privileged position we are in, developing young minds and young talent. So we take that responsibility really seriously. And we just want to get you to know you during the application process and interview so that we can match you with the right mentor and give you the right experiences and advice.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. So hopefully if anyone was wondering whether getting in is quite competitive or if they're up against much competition, hopefully what Elham said is sort of put your mind at rest, and you apply. And then you also share this with your friends. Again, this is for young people at sixth form level, at university level, at any university, at any college or sixth form. So please do share this opportunity within your network. There's another question here from Joe. It says, in getting into some of the top companies, the hard skills are non-negotiable. What are some of the soft skills that are highly valued in these professional spaces that are worth paying attention to?
Above all, it is fit, because nobody, and this is applied through the last several generations, and it's becoming increasingly important, because nobody wants to introduce a new team member into their company or their practice if they're going to upset anyone else. Yeah, they want to create teams that, yes, not only are highly talented, motivated, driven, ambitious, but most importantly, that they compete with integrity and that they fit with their current team. That's really, really important. And there are things you can do during your preparation for the interview to try and guess what that means. Of course, you can look at their websites, their social media posts, see what their values are, what is their company strategy, and what is important to them next, and how you can contribute to their teams and companies' strategy and achievement of the results they want. But above all, if you can get contacts through our program, contacts in that company, no one will tell you like it is, like someone who already works in that company. Because that's, that feedback about that company from someone who works there is not going to be in their marketing materials or in their websites. So do try and make sure networks and programs like Migrant Leaders who can connect you to someone who works there.
Great, amazing.
Can I just add to that, Anu? Just as a former recruiter, actually, some of the soft skills are actually in how you present yourself. And I'm just thinking of a couple of examples where I was actually part of a recruitment panel for an HR manager, and it was not the verbal answer that the candidate gave us, but the physical reaction in the face that kind of made all of us on the panel sit back and think, it's not going to work, actually. And so it's those sorts of skills that you actually also need to be aware of. And Anna, you mentioned self-awareness earlier in relation to one of Elham's answers, and just in relation to our interviews, some practical tips. Tell us what you're really good at, tell us what you're really proud of, but include things that you're prepared to discuss, and don't claim things that you can't back up with a discussion in a conversation with me, actually. We've had in the past, I've kind of had to challenge people because they actually are claiming things that they then can't back up, and it actually demonstrates lack of self-awareness, and it gives people pause for thought. Let's put it that way. So a degree of self-awareness, but also thinking about expanding on what you put in the application form in a conversation.
Yeah, amazing. I think what stands out to me from what you've just said is the need to be authentic, and in sort of talking about yourself, of course putting your best self forward, but also in a way that's quite true and in a way that can be substantiated. I think that's amazing. I think the question that I was going to ask kind of piggybacks off Elham's statement of fit being this soft skill that's desired. How do we sort of balance, or how do we reconcile fit with celebrating our difference and celebrating how different we can be? What if our difference doesn't necessarily fit into the culture of a particular organization? Does that mean it's definitely not for us? are we encouraged to bend in some ways? Are we encouraged to stay true to us? So it would be interesting to know your thoughts on like fit and difference, and how that can, whether that works together or not.
So that to me does not necessarily mean that you shouldn't apply to a particular firm. Sometimes, for example, if you want to enter the world of finance, if your target, for example, is to become a finance director as quickly as possible, let's say that was your objective, then one of the best routes is to qualify as a chartered accountant in the Big Four. Now, one of the traditional features of the Big Four accountancy firms, being EY, KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, is that generally speaking, they don't appear, how can I put it? They are diverse, and they very much want to be diverse, but in terms of fit, they are maybe not as visibly diverse in the ways you can express yourself, or the things you can wear, or some of those aspects of celebrating your differences. Maybe they are not as diverse as a place like Kantar, for example. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't apply to the Big Four, because if you want to excel in the field of finance, you do your training in EY, your views might change in a few years' time. You might end up in a practice in EY that is really suitable for you and you enjoy working with them. Or you might take the view that, you know what, I actually want to go and work after I've qualified in another company and take that brilliant brand that is EY to other companies who will welcome me, those decisions are not forever. It just depends on what will make you happy at that for the next few years, what will give you the skills and the connections that you need for the next few years. And the most important thing, ask yourself, what can you do for that company? Because you will not succeed if you only think about what can this company do for me. The best way of making others do things for you is really be more concerned about what you can do for them. I've always personally followed that formula to think, okay, what value can I bring them? And then the rest takes care of itself.
It's a very interesting perspective.
I just want to ask about that, actually, because I know there is that tension between the fit and the difference, but I guess the idealistic and the teacher in me would like to think that maybe by going and fitting and excelling at a company like that potentially in the future you could be part of the change that accepts more difference. Do you think, or is that just really idealistic?
It's wonderful. It's an ideal that I subscribed to, Catherine. But if I'm honest, it feels like swimming against the ocean.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, and we need to be honest here, yeah. My formula for authenticity is say what you think and do what you say. And that's another formula of mine that you can't go far wrong with. It's difficult. My plan for being the change now is to focus on developing the next generation of diverse talent and ethnic minorities so that they can go in their thousands and change the company cultures, because just a handful of us in senior roles is not enough. We need them to go there in the next generation in their tens of thousands, and then they will make that change and they will be the change.
You're a frustrated teacher, really.
Yeah, is that what it is? I'm getting the kids to do it on my behalf now.
I would just say, though, that I think the environment in this day and age is so much more flexible and receptive to new ideas than it might have been 25, 30 years ago. And in fact, I was just having a conversation about neurodiversity awareness and how it was not something that we were ever aware of really in the 90s, but now we're all aware of it to some degree, some to more degree than others, but, we're aware of it. So there is a much more welcoming environment. But my advice would be, and this is based on my work experience in terms of public sector and charity sector and voluntary sector, so not corporates, but my knowledge of corporates since I've started working with Elham actually, is that, get involved. There are networks and employee groups, specialist groups that, you can influence change within an organisation if you use the right channels. So join in, take part, and try and achieve incremental change if you can, because change has got to be evolutionary. It's not always going to be revolutionary.
Absolutely. And it's also, to build on what you rightly said, Fawzia, it's striking a balance between evolutionary and revolutionary change. For instance, and the employee resource groups that you mentioned, the ethnicity resource groups or neurodiversity groups and networks in corporates are evolutionary change, because they touch on the surface of these issues to raise awareness and gain some acceptance. But they unfortunately can't go deep enough into the kind of operational decisions around recruitment, decisions around project resourcing, around international mobility opportunities for women and ethnic minorities, the kind of operational decisions that actually make or break careers. So that's where a little dose of revolutionary change is needed. When, for example, I saw counselees of mine who, for example, a talented ethnic minority female was being brushed aside, maybe inadvertently, subconsciously, was being brushed aside for an amazing opportunity, I really took the view that this is the moment for me to be revolutionary and raise this as an issue at the highest level, and really stand up for that particular young ethnic minority female and say, look, she wants to do it, she's brilliant for it because of this and that, we've got to change that decision, we've got to put her forward. And that felt quite revolutionary when someone kind of sponsors a diverse person like that, because you're putting your reputation on the line and you're using your political capital for that particular person so that they get the right results. So that's a little dose of revolutionary challenging, so that the outcomes can be different for diverse talent.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Elham, Fawzia, Catherine, for sharing so candidly this evening. And thank you so much to Jo, Sheila. I think Timothy was here at one point, and was it Caroline? But she's no longer here. For taking time to join this evening. I do hope you've learned a thing or two, but even more so, I do hope you're inspired to go to migrantleaders.org.uk to read the impact report for yourself, and to download the candidate application form and to give it a go and to apply. If you have any further questions, I will just briefly type in my email. Even though if you signed up through Eventbrite, I've already been sending you a few emails, so I will send an email after today's session. If you have any further questions, please feel free to ask. And I think, Elham, you mentioned that the recording of today's session will also be sent out as well. So again, if you would want to revisit any of the points that were made, the pieces of advice and coaching that you received, you will also receive an email with all of that information as well. Thank you. Jo says, Jo thanks you all for your time. It was really informative. Yeah, okay, great. Amazing. Thank you so much. I wonder if you would have...
Thank you for organizing this. I know how much effort you've put into gathering your fellow Oxford students, and I'm really grateful. And also thank you to the team who joined us on this evening as well and shared their fantastic viewpoints.
Amazing. Thank you all.